And even within the silver roll, there were grades and ranks based on ethnicity and nationality, because some of the silver men, for instance, were Spanish or Italian, some were Indian, thank you very much, and so on. And always the lowest of the low were the people who were doing most of the work at all levels, the West Indians. The West Indians who ended up carrying the burden of the work, they were never less than 2/3 of the workforce on the Panama Canal. They had to accept the lowest in pay and ranking. And it's their story, some told in their own words, which forms a substantial part of my book, Dying to Better Themselves. In researching this story, I came to the conclusion that Panama was more than a gateway, a hub, or a canal. Travel to work on the canal and elsewhere provided the shortcut to a whole new way of life for generations who would have stagnated if they'd stayed at home. As we say, shortcut draw blood, long cut draw sweat, and the long and short of it was blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of tribulation, but triumph too. Their triumph was the combined effort of ordinary men and women to move the moribund islands of the West Indies into the 20th century. Far from being the colored man stereotype, as a laughable clothes horse draped in bling, the migrants were to become what I call agents of transformation. They were agents of transformation in the places to which they went, as well as their island homes, economically, socially, and politically. Since the 1850s, when they first went to Panama in large numbers, West Indians not only helped to alter the physical environment, but they simultaneously helped to develop religious, educational, and cultural institutions. They were pioneers and builders in every sense of the word, whether as plantation workers, industrial workers, as artisans, white-collar workers, professionals, or small farmers, and that's a very important element. Secondly, the immigrants themselves were transformed as individuals, partly because the places they went to were so different from home in every way. And the main elements that contributed to such transformation were the harsh environmental and working conditions, the insecurity and instability of the societies to which they went, which were ridden with internal struggles. And there was a lot of violence in these societies, some of it political, some of it directed at the West Indian workers by others. And let me hasten to say, this is where Jamaicans became attached to the gun. And so along with a watch, an accessory for the man in Panama was a gun. Though what I find interesting is some of them brought back their guns to Jamaica, but there's no report in the police reports after that of gun violence or gun crimes. So I don't know what they did with the guns. But this is a major part of what happened in Panama, the violence. And of course, they were exposed to extreme racism and on the American Canal Zone, literally racial segregation. It was like the American Deep South. On the positive side, though, they were able to acquire knowledge, skills, and experience of the world they would never have acquired at home. And one can say that in this case, travel was a university education of our forebears. And the third element that I'll touch on very briefly, because I deal with it extensively in the last chapter of my book, is the way in which they affected their island homes, again, economically, socially, and politically. The overall impact of migrants at this time was probably much greater than that of later ones, partly because they were able to travel and return home so frequently. So news and bodies traveled fast between Kingston and Cologne and the rest of the country. And while there was always a segment of the population abroad that battled poverty and destitution, and that's a very real part of the story, the money the successful ones brought back or sent home substantially boosted island economies and pushed the development of institutions such as banks and the postal services, for instance. Their investment in land and houses changed the physical landscape across Jamaica, and they started businesses large and small. They brought back skills, crafts, and abilities. A major economic element was the growth of exports that followed each wave of migrants. From island produce, yam, okay, I'll soon be done. Yam, rum, horses, and other livestock, to jackass rope and Benjamin's healing oil, and I might add ganja, which of course was medicinal at the time. Really, I mean, you know. Socially, their influence was mixed, since the emigration of so many men led to family upheavals, an added burden on the women and children left behind and sometimes abandoned, as in my poem that was read. But some with their newfound wealth were able to move their families into a different social class as they tested social and racial boundaries. And just to conclude, the Wall Street crash of 1929 and the worldwide economic depression which followed led to the closure of immigration outlets and the return of large numbers of migrants from all these other countries, including Panama and Cuba, many of them ill or destitute, returned to their homelands. This marked the ending of a fundamental freedom that Jamaicans had enjoyed for over 80 years, the freedom of movement. Many of the returnees settled in Kingston instead of returning to rural areas at a time when rural migrants in search of work were also pouring into the city, leading to the creation of vast shantytowns and an angry, starving, and combustible urban proletariat who were finally to ignite the riots of 1937-38, which engulfed the region. And what is significant is the role played in these events by people who had traveled and who were to become the catalysts, and also to provide leadership at all levels in the social and political ferment of the times. In fact, I challenge you to look at all the leadership in all the movements of the time, including Bedouardites, the Garvey movement, the three founders of Rastafari, etc. All of the leaders had traveled somewhere. They'd all left the island and come back. And among them were the ex-soldiers from World War I who had returned angry and embittered by the racism they encountered, and they were part of the social movement that led to the changes that took place in Jamaica. So collectively then, colored men and women brought back not just gold chain and watch, but ideas and ideologies that led to a questioning of the home society and ways in which they could change these societies, and change them they did. Thank you.
I know that was not just formality or because I asked you to stand. You were absolutely impressed and spellbound. Many times, you know, I speak truthfully. There are many times when we applaud out of formality and out of respect when we have very boring lecturers. This is definitely not one of them. We're going to, in the next maybe 15 minutes or so, take some questions.
Good afternoon, Celia. It's a pleasure is mine to see you here as a member staff of the National Library. You know, from the work that I'm doing, there is the of Jamaican Heritage and Encyclopedia of Jamaica. I've been helping as quickly as the time. You mentioned it. I get to understand one of the individuals that I am working on. Leonard Percival Howell, as you know, one of the founders of Rastafari.
Yes.
I think it was about October 1917 year ago, two profound literature that we have on Leonard Howell. The first Rasta by Ellen Lee and the Jamaica Journal, I think it was 1983, from Robert Hill, and mentioned that when he was with the British West India Regiment, I think, he went to Panama for a period. Is there any deeper knowledge of him here? Because they touched right at the head that Panama certainly have had some touch. Muslim and Dudley Thompson himself.
Yeah,
was
Dudley's
part of
in the
Panama,
book.
and a great cricketer,
Headley.
George
Yes,
Headley.
yes.
So with that, I am looking because I am very, I feel
Yes.
good about Leonard Howell.
Well,
because I think he has been a forgotten individual. So in terms
Yes,
of
I
that
don't.
touch,
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't have any information of him. I'm not even sure if he went to Panama. But the person to ask is Robert Hill, because I think I know he has done research there. So you better keep on with the research, and then next time you can tell me, because I'd love to know.
Senior, enjoyed your lecture. I just wondered, my grandfather got tired of Panama when he found the U.S. College students very unintelligent. He's trying to teach them calculus, and he moved to Cuba. But I'm just wondering whether any historical evidence bears out the question whether Panama is the entry point to places like Cuba and Costa Rica, or did people directly migrate there for other reasons?
Yeah, I call Panama the mothership because it was the first. It gave people confidence to move on from there. And a lot of people actually moved from Panama to Costa Rica and these other countries. And when construction ended in 1914, a lot of the former workers, that coincided with World War I, so a lot of people people went as soldiers from Panama, 3,000 joined the West India regiments. And then after the war, what happened is Cuba became, with American investment, Cuba superseded the West Indies as the world's largest sugar producer. And there was a dance of millions. So the next big migration from these islands was to Cuba. And some who were in Panama went to Cuba, but a lot went directly from the islands. But you have to understand, in that time period, people were just moving around everywhere. They just jumped from one place to the other. So Cuba attracted people both from Latin America, Panama, but also directly from the islands.
I wanted to ask you a question about the women. You mentioned that a lot of them are hecklers and traders, but were there any women who, established themselves as, women of means and came back and did well for themselves?
Yeah. I don't know specifically but I'm sure that a lot of them did, because a lot of women went on their own and were independent. They had guest houses, they had hotels. I mentioned the higglers, but women were involved in just about all aspects of life. But I don't know specifically. I haven't done that, that research about women who made it big there and came back. But I'm sure there were some. Thank you.